Chapter 5. The Drive to the Civic Center. The city was unrecognizable. Ethan Matthews tightened his grip on the steering wheel as he maneuvered through the chaotic streets, his heart pounding with unease. The once familiar roads were now lined with military vehicles and armed guards, their black uniforms stark against the gray, smoke-filled sky. Storefronts had been ransacked, some burning while desperate looters ran through the shattered glass doors, grabbing whatever they could. The air was thick with fear, not just his own, but an overwhelming sense of desperation and lawlessness. Daniel sat beside him in the passenger seat, silent but tense, his fingers clutching the worn leather strap of his backpack. The young man, just 13 years old, had always been full of life, full of laughter. Now his face was pale, his eyes hollow from everything they had seen since the Rapture. "We shouldn't be doing this," Daniel muttered, staring out the window. "We don't have a choice," Ethan replied. "They cut off my bank account this morning. No ID, no money. If we want to eat, we need that registration card." The radio had been broadcasting the same message on repeat since the day after Claire and Emily disappeared. All citizens must report to the nearest civic registration center for processing. Failure to comply will result in forfeiture of services, employment, and legal protections. This is a mandatory directive under the Global Unification Initiative. Failure to comply. Ethan swallowed hard. He knew exactly what that meant. Up ahead, the line to the Civic Center stretched for blocks. People huddled in clusters, some arguing in hushed voices, others staring blankly ahead. Large digital screens lined the exterior of the massive concrete building, flashing the same face over and over. Adrian Lucero. His sharp, refined features remained eerily calm as he spoke. "We are building a better world, my friends, a world free of division, free of uncertainty. Accept your place in the new order, and you will lack for nothing. Reject it, and you will be left behind." Ethan clenched his jaw as he pulled the truck into a parking lot. Left behind, the words felt like acid in his throat. Daniel let out a shaky breath. "Dad, if Mom was here, what do you think she would do?" Ethan turned off the engine and stared straight ahead. She wouldn't be here, because she was already gone. Inside the Civic Center. The air inside the Civic Center was sitting, thick with the scent of sweat and anxiety. Armed guards stood at every checkpoint, in their dark helmets making them appear inhuman, their faces hidden behind tinted visors. Ethan and Daniel shuffled forward in the slow-moving line, the sound of shuffling feet and hushed murmurs filling the room. To the left, a young mother clutched her toddler, rocking him as she whispered reassurances that he wouldn't understand. To the right, an elderly man with a vacant stare was being led away by two officers, his protests barely audible over the noise. Near the front of the line, a large screen displayed another looping announcement. This time, a woman dressed in an immaculate black suit stood before the camera. "Welcome to the Global Citizen Registration Center. Your cooperation ensures a smooth transition into a new era of peace and security. Please have your identification ready. If you do not yet have an identification mark, you will be assigned one today." Ethan felt a cold chill run through him. Identification mark. Daniel shifted beside him. "Dad, do you think this is it?" Ethan exhaled slowly. "Yes, son, I do." For months, Claire had warned him. The mark of the beast. She had talked about Revelation, about a one-world government, about a system that would control who could buy and sell. He had listened half-heartedly, never believing it would happen in his lifetime. Yet, here they stood. Ahead, the line split into two sections, those willing to fully comply where they were led to a brightly lit room, where they were given their permanent digital ID, a glowing mark implanted on the right hand or their forehead. Those who hesitated were pulled aside, and they were not coming back. Ethan's pulse quickened. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to turn around, to take Daniel and run. But there were soldiers everywhere, cameras everywhere. And then his moment of choice arrived. A tall woman in uniform gestured toward him. Step forward. Ethan swallowed hard and obeyed. She scanned his old ID card, then smiled, but her expression did not reach her eyes. Ethan Matthews, citizen of the former United States, you are eligible for global identification. Will you be registering today? He hesitated. Behind him, a guard shifted. He could feel the pressure, the weight of unseen eyes watching. Daniel looked at him, his son, just a boy, but already forced to make a man's decision. No, Ethan said finally, his voice firm. Daniel straightened his shoulders. Me neither. The woman's expression did not change. Very well, she said smoothly. Then she pressed a small button on her wrist communicator. 2 guards appeared almost instantly, escorting them to holding. Escort them to holding, she ordered. And just like that, Ethan's world went dark. A cold cell. Ethan groaned as he regained consciousness, his ribs aching from the rough handling. The room was damp, the air stale. His hands were tied behind his back with thick rope and fibers biting into his skin. Daniel? His voice was hoarse. I'm here, came the quiet response. Ethan turned his head. Daniel sat beside him, his eyes red-rimmed but full of defiance. The door clanged open. A man in a sleek black uniform stepped in, his presence commanding, his name tag read Rowan. You had your chance to comply, Rowan said. Now you have a choice. Accept the mark or remain an enemy of the state. Ethan lifted his chin. Then I guess I'm an enemy. Rowan sighed. You Christians always make things difficult. He turned to the guards. Take the boy. Daniel's eyes widened as he was dragged from the room, kicking and shouting. Ethan fought against his restraints. No, take me instead. The door slammed shut. He was alone. And in an unseen realm, the battle had only begun. The war in the heavens. Above the earth, the heavens trembled. The veil between the realms had been torn wide open, and now the battle spilled across the skies, stretching beyond mortal sight. Vast legions of radiant warriors stood poised, their flaming swords drawn, armor gleaming with the light of eternity. Their banners bore the insignia of the Almighty, shimmering with celestial fire, a brilliance that no darkness could quench. Across from them, an abyssal storm churned, twisting the air with sickening shadows. The fallen ones had gathered, their obsidian wings casting a cold, lifeless glow. At their center stood Lucifer himself, his presence a mockery of light, a thing that had once been glorious but now twisted with rage and unquenchable pride. Claire and Emily stood in the celestial gardens, looking upon the battlefield in stunned silence. From this vantage point, the spiritual war was laid bare, no longer hidden in whispers and unseen forces, but revealed in its full, terrifying scope. Emily's small hand clutched Claire's tightly. Mom, her voice was barely a whisper. The war is starting, isn't it? Claire's throat tightened. It already has. Just then a voice spoke, rich, deep, and filled with undeniable authority. Fear not, beloved. Claire and Emily turned, and instantly every trace of fear melted away. Standing before them, his robe gleaming like the morning sun, was Jesus. His eyes, a fire that burned with love and justice, settled upon him. And in an instant, the weight of sorrow had been lingering since their departure from earth lifted. His very presence was peace, a stillness amid the war, a beacon that no storm could overshadow. He stepped forward and cupped Emily's face gently in his scarred hands. You are home now, little one. There is no pain here, no night, no sorrow, only joy everlasting. Emily inhaled sharply, as if breathing for the first time without fear. She leaned into him, overwhelmed by a love so consuming it defied words. Jesus turned to Claire, his gaze piercing yet full of infinite grace. Your heart is burdened for those left behind. Tears welled in Claire's eyes. Ethan, Daniel, they're in danger. I can feel it. They are indeed, Jesus said, his expression both solemn and resolute. But take heart, I have not abandoned them. I do not lose what is mine. Claire let out a trembling breath. Will they make it? Jesus' gaze did not waver. The fire will test them, but those who stand will be refined like gold. He lifted his hand, and suddenly the air shimmered, bending and folding like a vision being drawn across fabric in time itself. Look, he said, and Claire saw. The test of fire. Ethan sat slumped against the cold wall of his cell, his wrists raw from the restraints that had bound him for hours. The silence was heavy, pressing on him like an unseen weight. Then the door opened. Rowan stepped inside once more, his movements slow, deliberate. 2 guards flanked him, their rifles slung across their chest. You still have time, Matthews, Rowan said, his voice eerily calm. Take the mark, and all this ends, and your son can be free. Ethan lifted his head, his body aching, but with his resolve had not wavered. And what price does that freedom cost? Rowan's lips curved slightly. Loyalty, nothing more. You don't even have to believe in it. Just comply. Ethan swallowed hard. And if I don't? Rowan let out a slow sigh. Then the boy dies first. Ethan's entire world tilted. The breath was ripped from his lungs, his heart hammering so violently that for a moment he thought he might collapse under the weight of those words. Not Daniel, not his son. Rowan turned and gestured towards the guards. The door opened once more, and Ethan's worst nightmare materialized before his eyes. Daniel was dragged inside, bruised, bloodied, but still breathing. Dad, he croaked, his voice hoarse but filled with defiant fire. Ethan's vision blurred with rage and anguish. You touch him, and I swear. You're in no position to swear anything, Matthews, Rowan interrupted coolly. You want him to live? Then kneel. Take the mark. It's that simple. Ethan clenched his fist, his nails digging into the palms. He felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff with nothing but darkness below. His mind screamed with temptation. It would be so easy. Just one moment of weakness, one act of compliance, and Daniel would be safe. They could leave this place. They could go home. But it would cost his soul. He thought of Claire. He thought of Emily. He thought of the moment they disappeared, of the regret that had been eating away at him ever since. And suddenly, a memory surfaced. Ethan, if you don't make a decision for Christ now, one day you'll be forced to make it in fire. Claire's words, spoken years ago. He had brushed them off then, but now they were only his lifeline. The fire was here, and he would not bow. Ethan exhaled, slow and controlled. He lifted his head and met Rowan's gaze without fear. You can take everything from me, he said. You can kill me. You can kill my son, but you will not own my soul. Rowan studied him for a long moment and sighed. Pity. He turned towards the guards. Prepare the boy. We'll see if his father's faith holds when he watches his son burn. Daniel gasped as he was dragged towards the door. Dad! Ethan surged forward, but the guards held him back. And as Daniel was ripped from the room, Ethan did the only thing left to do. He cried out to the one he had ignored for far too long. Jesus! And in the unseen realm, the battle erupted in full force. The power of heaven. Claire gasped as the vision vanished. Jesus, please, she pleaded. Please don't let them die like this. Jesus' face was full of both sorrow and power. Their trial's not over, he said, but neither are they alone. And in that moment, the sky split open with the sound like roaring thunder. A host of angels blazing in celestial armor descended upon the battlefield. Michael, the great archangel, lifted his sword. Enough! A brilliant shockwave of holy light surged outward, colliding with the demonic forces. The war had begun, and the power of heaven would not be silent. The test of fire. Ethan and Daniel were shoved into a cold, dimly lit room deep inside the Civic Center. Rowan stood in the center, his expression a mixture of amusement and disgust. You Christians are so predictable, he said smoothly, circling them like a predator, always so willing to suffer for a God who abandoned you. Ethan met his gaze with defiance. God has not abandoned us. You abandoned him. Rowan's smile did not waver, and yet, here you are, powerless, afraid. He gestured towards the guards. Separate them. Daniel cried out as he was yanked away, his arms bound behind him. Ethan lunged forward, but a rifle slammed into his stomach, knocking the breath from his lungs. Rowan stepped closer. It's simple, Matthews. Take the mark. Swear allegiance. You and your son can walk out of here. Free men. Ethan's jaw clenched. And if I refuse? Rowan sighed as if bored. Then you'll both burn. He nodded towards a massive iron-walled furnace in the corner of the room. The flames licked hungrily at the air, and the heat pulsing like a living thing. Daniel's voice trembled. Dad. Ethan's heart pounded. This was it. The defining moment of his entire existence. His whole life had been one of compromise, of choosing comfort over conviction. But no more. He thought of Claire, of Emily, of Jesus standing in heaven watching him now. Ethan closed his eyes and whispered, Lord, give me strength. Then he turned to Rowan, his voice unwavering. I will never deny Jesus Christ. Rowan's expression darkened. Then burn. The guards moved to throw Daniel toward the furnace, and the entire building shook. The fourth man in the fire. The furnace erupted violently, its flames shooting high as if something divine had stepped into it. A wave of supernatural power blasted through the room, knocking Rowan and the guards to their knees. Ethan stared in shock, because inside the fire stood a man, not consumed, not afraid. The figure turned, his eyes burning with divine fire, his robe shining brighter than the sun. Jesus. He extended his hand towards Ethan and Daniel. Come home, my sons. The guards screamed, scrambling for cover. Rowan's face twisted in terror. Ethan fell to his knees, overwhelmed, and in that moment he let go, of fear, of doubt, of everything that had ever held him back. Daniel grabbed his father's hand, and together they stepped into the fire. Heaven's gates. The pain never came. Instead, peace. Ethan opened his eyes. Golden light surrounded him. The air hummed with celestial music, and then he saw them. Claire, Emily. They ran towards him, their faces filled with joy beyond words. Ethan fell into Claire's embrace, and his heart overflowing. Daniel laughed, spinning Emily around in his arms, and above them, Jesus stood smiling. Welcome home, he said, and Ethan wept, because he was finally, truly home.